Now, I know that Game Week 31 isn't even over yet, but if you know me, you know that doesn't stop me making some FPL content. And there's already quite a lot to talk about. So in this video, we're going to go through players to buy and avoid ahead of Game Week 32. Now, I do feel like a bit of a broken record going through the fixtures every time I make an FPL video at the moment, but I think they're so important to your decision making right now that you need to take every decision with upcoming fixtures in mind, right? So we've got Game Week 32 being a double game week for Crystal Palace. They play Man City, Newcastle. Double as well for Newcastle. They play Man United and Crystal Palace. So naturally, I'm going to focus at the start of the video on these two teams. In 33, we've got a double as well. So Crystal Palace double again. A double for Crystal Palace. Man City double, Villa double, and Arsenal double. And all of those teams in 33 that double have a blank. And then here, according to Ben Crellin, obviously dependent on cup results, we've got a percentage likelihood of specific teams doubling in Game Week 36, right? So Crystal Palace have a 42% chance of another double game week in 36. Man City have a 64% chance of another double in 36. Villa have a 48. Bournemouth have a 64. Tottenham have a 48. Wolves have a 42. And then Forest and West Ham both with 26% likelihood to keep a clean sheet. So if you play it by the odds, it looks like, not necessarily bankers, but it looks like Man City and Bournemouth could well have double game weeks in 36. So before you make any transfer decisions, it's important to bear all of that in mind. Like I said, I'm going to focus on the two teams with a double game week in 32. 32? Yeah, it's 32. I get confused between the game weeks because they're coming so thick and fast at the moment. Yeah, so here we go then. Palace assets. They're the first team to double. Now, what I've done, I tend to do this on a double game week or when there are specific teams worth targeting. I've got like a 3-tier list of my picks of players. I've got players who I think are genuinely pickable. Players I think are a bit meh, like as though you should probably pick the pickable players over the players in the middle, and then all the others I think are bad, basically. So only the players listed on this graphic I would probably end up buying. So in terms of pickable assets, right, I think Munoz is great. He is a defender, right, that can get attacking returns consistently through 3 different means. Obviously, scored in the game against Brighton. Palace are not too bad defensively. Obviously, unfortunate to get 2 red cards in the game against Brighton. Obviously, conceded their goal as well. That might impact things a little bit defensively. I think particularly Gahey being sent off, that's quite big. I think it's a 1, maybe. Let me know in the comments how many games he's out for. But if it's a 1-game ban, or even, if it's 3 for suspension or whatever, I would be worried about Palace performing defensively without Gahey, because I just think he's so good. We all know how good he is. But I think with Munoz, he's a player, like I said, that can get returns through goals, assists, and clean sheets. So even if the defense doesn't look, or the fixture doesn't look favourable for Palace from a defensive point of view, we can still get returns through attacking means. I still think he's one of the best. Still think he's one of the best Palace options. You got Mateta, who I think is probably my favourite Crystal Palace asset. Scored, obviously, in Game Week 31 off the Eze assist. It was a great goal as well. And also, we haven't seen a penalty that the two players have argued over recently. But I think, although penalties are shared between the two, in my mind, I think Mateta is most likely to take the next one, if that makes sense. Then you've got 2 midfielders in Sarr and Eze. And here's my thoughts, right? Game for game, I do think Eze is a better option than Sarr, right? But one thing that worries me about Eze is his injury record, and it's been quite poor for the last couple of seasons. And I imagine, well, you should have that in mind when picking him as well, because he could get injured. And I think Glasner will have that in mind as well. So playing 2 games in the space of 1 week, will Glasner play him for a full 90 in both of those games? I think probably not. Whereas Ismaila Sarr, I genuinely think he's got a better injury record for one, and I think he's got a chance of playing more minutes than Eze does. Numbers-wise, over the last sort of 4 or 5 game weeks, Sarr is better than Eze in terms of underlying data and goals and assists. So it's a question really of, I think Eze's probably the lower owned and a little bit differential, but you're probably risking a little bit more by going for him with like his risk of injury. That's kind of my thoughts. I would personally, I think, pick Sarr over Eze if it was me. I already have, but that would be my view. And then I've got a feeling there'll be a few managers using their assistant manager as well. And I think Glasner is a great pick. I personally would say that myself because I picked him as an assistant manager back along. and he scored me, well, he got bonus for winning a game against a top team. So I can't actually remember who they played at the time. You might be able to remind me. But I think he's primed for some table bonus. And when you look at the fixtures they've got, Man City and Newcastle, there's definitely some table bonus on the table for game week 32. And also, obviously, they got the double game week in 33 as well. Bournemouth might be a bit close to them, but there's potential table bonus there to be on against Arsenal as well. And obviously, depending on how things go in terms of the league over those games, you know, you're looking at 2 potential double game weeks where he could get quite a bit of table bonus. So I do like Glasner as an option. And I do think if I was picking 3 Crystal Palace assets with the assistant manager active, I would probably go for Glasner and sacrifice one of Sarr and Eze. And then in terms of like the average picks, I mentioned him in my previous video saying I would probably put him amongst my 3 Palace assets that are my favourite in terms of, you know, ones I'd have in my team. I said it was probably Henderson, Munoz and Mateta, but I've actually gone for Sarr instead. And you know, the thought of going for an attacking player over a goalkeeper, I think, just became clearer and clearer for me as the week went on. Yes, I think Henderson is a good option. You know, he's a goalkeeper that can get returns through both clean sheets and saves bonus. I think he's averaging something like 2.8, 2.9 saves per game, which is pretty much saves bonus per game. But when you look at the fixtures, how many clean sheets realistically, and I guess the same applies to Munoz as well, you know, but he's obviously got the attacking returns. How many clean sheets do you actually see Crystal Palace keeping there? I mean, he could get a lot of saves, maybe save some penalties, etc. But I don't think it's positive enough from a defensive perspective where you could pick him. And then I put Kamada on there as well. Started the Brighton game, and I think with Nketiah being red carded, his minutes look good. I just wanted to drop him in as a really rogue differential. Would I pick him? Absolutely not. But if you're like desperate and want to go a bit different, maybe you could pick him over Sarr or Eze. But yeah, just an outside chance or an outside shout that I thought I'd mention. All right then, moving on to the Newcastle assets. Similar sort of vein where we got quite a lot of players in the pickable category, a few in sort of average, and then, yeah, I wouldn't bother with any of the others. So in terms of the pickable assets, some of them are pretty obvious, right? Isak and Murphy, I think, would be the first 2 on my sheet at the moment. In terms of my wildcard decisions for Game Week 31, I actually was on Gordon all week. Made all my videos talking about Anthony Gordon, then on my deadline stream, I changed it to Murphy. And I did that because, well, number one, I thought Murphy's, at least minutes in the short term, were more secure, given that Gordon was still coming back from injury, and I wanted someone that was safe to start in Game Week 31, so I picked Murphy. And also, when you look at his non-penalty, so non-penalty expected goal involvement in terms of actual goals and assists, plus expected per 90, so yeah, expected and goals and assists in total, Murphy is actually performing higher than Gordon is this season in terms of that data. I think Gordon's data is slightly propped up by the fact he's obviously taken some penalties. So yeah. That's why I went for Murphy. And I personally think Murphy is better than Gordon. But if you're in a luxury position where you can afford to bring in Gordon ahead of the double in 32, I quite like the idea of it, because even though the data for Murphy is better than Gordon, my heart tells me to go for Gordon. You know, I went for it because of other things in my team. I needed to save the budget to upgrade Timber to Saliba, etc. So that's why I went for Murphy in the end. There was more than just, you know, the head-to-head against Gordon. But yeah, just something to bear in mind. And you got a couple of defenders in Burn and Livramento, both around, I think they both are 4.5 million because Burn went up in price. I think you're battling on a couple fronts with both of these players, right? Burn is going to get you, I would say, slightly more guaranteed minutes than Livramento is. And I'm not saying that's because Livramento doesn't deserve the minutes. He's been playing really well at left back for Newcastle. But if Burn is playing at centre half, I just feel like Livramento will get through more distance during the double game week fixtures, if that makes sense, as a fullback probably runs more than a centre-back does. So with that in mind, I think Burn's minutes are probably more secure. And if there was one player I'd back to start both games over the other, it would be Burn over Livramento. Does that make sense? And then in terms of an attacking point of view, I'd say Livramento is more likely to get assists, just with the fact he's a fullback and will attack. But he's not been all that attacking in recent games. You can see his data this season. I think he's put up less than 0.1 expected goal involvements per 90, which even for a defender is pretty well. An attacking fullback is pretty low. Whereas Dan Burn has also not put up much goal threat, but I do think just with his sheer size, he's got a chance of scoring from set pieces. And I think with all of that combined, their attacking threat, I would value them as relatively similar. So my decision would be down to minutes, and I'd probably give it to Dan Burn. And then you got Nick Pope, who I think is a decent shout. I just think, I don't know, if I was looking at Newcastle players, I'm probably picking Isak Murphy in a defender and not going for Nick Pope. I do think he's a decent option, but just with that, you know, defender and 2 attackers in mind, I probably wouldn't go for him. And then in terms of sort of the average category, you got Trippier and Cher, who I think will obviously start alongside Burn and Livramento, but I don't see the reason why you'd spend more on them, if that makes sense. Trippier's not the player he has been in previous FPL seasons gone by, and he's 1 million, I believe, more expensive than Livramento, and it's the same for Cher. I think they're too expensive, and there's no need to pick him. And then you got Eddie Howe, who obviously you can pick him as your assistant manager, right? Man United, Crystal Palace, you could probably back him to play both games. But I just think with the assistant manager chip, I've always said this all along about it, you want to be targeting the table bonus rather than like a manager that's got a good chance of winning every game. I just think there's so many points on the table if you attack the table bonus. It's a game-breaking chip if the table bonus comes off. You talk about table bonus, but I really do think you need to attack it. So for me, I would put Howe in like the average category. I probably wouldn't go for him as my assistant manager, and I'd favour Glasner. Oh, Saka. I picked him on my wild card. I'll talk about another player in a second who I'm going to mention. But I benched Rodgers for Saka, which so far, I'm keeping tabs on the Villa-Nottingham Forest game, just checking my phone. Villa are currently 1-0 up, and guess who scored it? The player I benched, Morgan Rodgers. I put a joke tweet out saying it was great because I got Morgan Rodgers covered off my bench for Saka because Saka got benched, but that obviously didn't happen. Just checking my phone to load the score. We'll let that load while I talk about Saka. So yeah, my concern about Saka, he's just got the 1 goal, thankfully, Rodgers at the moment. My concern about Saka is his minutes in upcoming games. So what this tells us, him being benched in that game in 31, right, tells us that Arteta is obviously prioritising the Champions League, right? And when you look at Arsenal's upcoming fixtures, so obviously they play in the Champions League against Real Madrid on Tuesday. Then they've got Brentford on Saturday, and they play Real Madrid again on the Wednesday. Now, if Saka's been sacrificed in the Premier League before playing Real Madrid this week, could he also be sacrificed in the Premier League before playing Real Madrid in the quarterfinal on Wednesday? I think the answer could well be yes. And then the games after that are really thick and fast. So, you know, he probably does start the Ipswich game, I think. He probably does start the Ipswich game. But then it's 3 days after that they got Palace at home. Are his minutes, based on what we've learned about Arteta using him, you know, in the Premier League with the Champions League coming up right now, what does that mean for his minutes coming up? No one knows the answer to this, right? I'm not going to pretend I do. Obviously, the Ipswich and... just checking which games are the double. Yeah, so it would be Gameweek 32, Arsenal, Brentford's the single, and then they got Ipswich and Crystal Palace. Yeah, Ipswich and Crystal Palace in Gameweek 33. Sorry, bear with, I was just checking his fixtures. What do you think his minutes are going to be in upcoming games? I just think... Sorry, I'm flashing through slides quick willy-nilly there. But I just think they're risky. That's probably what I'm saying. I know previously Saka has been, you know, a nailed-on 90-minute man pretty much every game, every season for Arsenal. But I think what we've learned from his... Well, he had hamstring surgery, didn't he? And I think that was from Arteta's overuse. Now, I feel bad. Well, I don't feel bad really criticising him because I think Arteta's overuse of Saka caused the injury. So you've got all of those factors coming in. You know, Champions League, returning from injury, overusing him and causing his hamstring injury. I think Arteta will think about his minutes in game weeks coming up. So what this leads me to say, basically, and it might have already been said on other FPL content, but you're looking ahead at game week 33, right? I know we're talking about 32 in this video. But who is the best captain for Gaming 33? With that in mind, that Saka is a little bit, I would say, of a minutes risk. Maybe it could be Marmoush or even just Mateta. I don't know. I'm sort of in between who is the best captain for 33. Let me know in the comments who you think. Morgan Rodgers, he's on my bench. I swear Morgan Rodgers only scores points when he's on my bench. I don't know about you guys, but I benched him this week. Let me know in the comments if you benched Morgan Rodgers. I don't really have much to say about him. We all know he's a good asset in the game, right? And I wouldn't change my decision, I don't think, to bench him for Saka, given that he was playing Nottingham Forest. We got a bit of a sniff that Saka was going to be benched, and then I think there was a leak that was doing the rounds on Twitter or X about 30 seconds before the deadline. So I had no chance of responding, and I didn't even know if the leak was accurate, right? So, yeah, it happened. But I guess I just wanted to do a little piece on Rodgers possibly being the biggest troll of the season so far. And yeah, let me know in the comments if you started him or left him on your bench. And finally, now, I don't know how secure you can be about his minutes, right? It's a similar story, obviously, with Arsenal. Villa in the same stage, quarterfinals now of the Champions League, right? And they got PSG, Marco Asensio's old club, who I think he's actually eligible to play against. If he wasn't eligible to play against them, then I think I'd absolutely really consider him for my FPL team. But he's only started 2 Premier League games since he joined in January. Obviously, game week 31 against Forest, and then he started and scored a brace against Chelsea. He's looked sensational, I think, since he's been at Villa. And I'm talking about these players as the Villa game's going on. So if anything happens to him, then I'm going to look like a bit of a mug here. But I do think he's a pretty decent differential. Now, I'm not saying I don't think there's any justification to pick him ahead of game week 32 because of all of those Champions League fixtures and the fact, he doesn't have a double game week. But he does have Southampton away, which is possibly the best, other than Southampton at home, possibly the best single game week fixture you could get. And then he's got the double in 33. I just think he's a player to think about as a differential. If I was picking Villa attackers at the moment, I would look at obviously, Rodgers would probably be my number 1, just given the security of minutes that he's got and the fact that he's a cheaper price. And I'd probably put Asensio at number 2 at the moment. Rashford, he's currently, I think, playing in Watkins' place because Watkins is managing a knee injury. But I'd imagine, that gets better as the weeks go by. Watkins and Rashford will share minutes. I don't really trust Rashford as an option for minutes. I think Asensio's better. Yeah, I think he's a decent differential, particularly if you're looking at game week 33 and you're free hitting in 34. I'll just go back to the fixtures. They're so important, these fixtures, so I've got to keep banging on about them. My initial plan when I wildcarded in 31, right, was to consider moving Jacob Murphy onto Asensio for game week 33. So do you get the double out of Asensio? I'm free hitting, obviously, in game week 34. And then, obviously, Villa have a chance of doubling again game week 36. So you have Asensio potentially for 2 double game weeks. Yeah, just something to think about. And he's only 3.7% owned. All right, well, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that and found it useful. Like I said, I'm recording this video and I'm literally have to go out this evening. So I'm recording this video as the Villa game's going on. So if anything happens to Rodgers or Asensio, you can laugh at me in the comments for talking about them in my video. But yeah, I think they'll hopefully get through that game unscathed. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave me a like rating. Let me know in the comments what you think of my opinions, who your favourite Palace, Newcastle assets are, and if you had Morgan Rodgers on your bench. And if you haven't already, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the Golden Goal channel. Should be just there on your screen as the camera's trying to focus. Thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you. I don't know why I did that. I'll catch you in my next video.